Hey, greetings everybody. I want to talk to you today about a phenomenon that I talked about with Isaac Shapiro over the weekend called othering. And let's explore a little bit how that impacts all of us and how it actually, recognizing it, opens up tremendous freedom and possibility. So, most of us, we have grown up from our childhood in some kind of relationship to authority, which means either you grew up, either the way that you got through your childhood and made your childhood work was to obey. You know, if your parents were offering you fairly reasonable incentives, you know, like clean your room and we'll do this, and you go, okay, I understand if I just do what they tell me to do, I'm going to be good and I'll have a nice time and we'll all get along great. But if your parents were kind of bat crazy and, you know, drinking and hollering, then you realize that you don't want to actually cooperate with the powers that run your life because it leads you to unhappiness. So you learn that the way to get through things is to be in defiance and to be rebellious. So either way, most of us, by the time we reached early adulthood, we had primarily learned to be obedient or defiant, and there wasn't much else. So as you grow into your early 20s, you know, hopefully you develop another relationship. Not all of us do. Many of us stay stuck in permanent obedience. In fact, a lot of people stay stuck in permanent obedience and just buy the things they've been told to buy and go earn money in the way they've been told to earn money. And then at some point, it's like, shoo, what was that? That was your life, mate. Now you're dead. Sorry, you just kept obeying. So many of us we go through our whole lives through into retirement and death just obeying. And many of us get stuck in a teenage relationship of defiance and rebellion, even when we're rebelling against something that may be possible to cooperate with. So the way you transcend the obedience, defiance polarity, of course, is through becoming an autonomous, responsible adult and learning how to cooperate and collaborate with people that you can create with. So that's the kind of the maturing leap beyond that duality, is to learn to collaborate. But this requires us to be able to see the split of defiance and obedience and to transcend it. So as long as you're caught in the split, you're going to develop a relationship to authority. And that relationship to authority, of course, is it means that the authority is other than you, because you have a relationship to it. You're either going, yes, I'll do what you say, yes, I'll do what you say, so you're obeying them, or you're in a defiant, no, I'm not going to do what they tell me to do, but either way, you have othered them. And generally, what we do, all of us, as you know, this goes back, if you read Yuval Noah Harari's book, Sapiens, you'll see this goes back as long as we have recorded history. Whoever we call them and develop an externalized relationship with, we tend sooner or later to villainize. We make them into villains. We villainize people we don't know. So if you watch this TV series, The Durrells in Corfu, delightful TV series. I think it was on, I don't know, I think I watched it on Amazon. It's a really great series. It's free with Amazon Prime. I shouldn't have just done that as an advert. But anyway, it's a great series. And you see when they're living in Corfu, there's this instinctive thing that the Greeks hate the Turks and the Turks hate the Greeks. Now, I'm not Greek and I'm not Turkish. So when I look at that, I go, how absurd. You know? And then you hear Greek people saying, oh, he's Turkish. So he's got this and this and he's arrogant. He must have all these qualities simply because he's Turkish. And the Turks go, oh, well, the Greeks, they're lazy, they're slovenly, they're dirty, you never wash. Again, it's like somebody that you feel is different from you, you're going to just generically villainize simply because you don't know who they are. Same thing if you go visit Tel Aviv in Israel. It's wonderful, actually, how the Arab and the Jewish cultures can live side by side. But generally, if you talk to Jewish people, they say, "Oh, the Arabs, they do this. They'd have this meat market. It's not clean. You know, it's just if anybody's Arab, they're just put into a bucket of qualities that are undesirable, and vice versa. So we tend to other people that we feel are different from us. We do this in the US, you know, that United States separated by these huge oceans on the left and the right. We've got Canada with a tenuous friendship to the north and Mexico, who we tend to other to the south. And so it's very easy for Americans to get into othering, particularly, you know, people far away. much less than in Europe, where there are porous borders, and French people and German people, they don't other each other so much because it's only a short drive, and you can go see that they're very similar to you, even though they speak the same language. So othering also happens even within a culture. Othering happens through social class, right? So if you watch the show Downton Abbey, another of my favorites, I'm giving away all my pet vices here, but I watched every episode of Downton Abbey, and I cried at all the right moments and went, whoa, at all the right moments. I know it sounds pathetic, doesn't it? But that's just my weakness. So Downton Abbey, it's about class structure. So there's this wonderful bit where Mary, the heiress of the Downton dynasty, she meets her cousin who grew up as a lawyer, which was not such a prestigious thing. The landowners, they don't have to work, but the professionals, people who have a profession, they're kind of a lower down. And at one point, they're at dinner at the beginning. She ends up marrying the guy, but at the beginning she says, your kind of people. She says, oh, your kind of people, you like working, as though it was a choice. Right? Of course, it's an obligation because of your socioeconomic class, but it was really fascinating to see in the way that script was written, is the way that anything you don't fully understand, you tend to other. We saw the same thing with the second George Bush, George W. Bush. He was giving an interview, and very sincerely, he had this way of leaning forward and being very sincere, and he said, I really want to understand better how poor people think. As if poor people is a sort of choice, like, I think I'm going to be a poor person because I have these beliefs. But he was going, I really want to understand better how poor people think and why people choose to live that way. It was a very kind of naive way of looking at things. Like, well, I'm rich, and these other people, I guess they just prefer it that way. So when you other people, they seem very different from you, and we tend to villainize them. Some people, of course, and this is where it's getting to where othering really gets to be problematic for a lot of us. Many of us have chosen deliberately a lifestyle of simplicity, right? I did that. Many people have chosen, I don't want to be plugged into the socioeconomic machine. I want to be free. I want to live with people in community. I want to dance. I want to grow my food. I want to live simply. I want to live in a way that has integrity. And what happens then is we look at the 1%, we look at people who have a lot of money, and we don't just perceive, oh, well, these people are living different in an imbalanced socioeconomic system. We don't just see greed or fear or insecurity. We actually demonize. And this, incidentally, is why a lot of people who have chosen simpler lives, we call them spiritual. Often it's like, oh, I'm going to live simply. I'm going to practice enoughness and gratitude and connection. So you develop a spiritual belief system, and then we other people who don't have that belief system, we tend to demonize them. So I want to just share a little bit my experience of this in my own life, and how life kind of forced me in a way to look beyond my habits of othering, because as we really understand this, we'll see that othering makes things look way worse. Yeah, you'll see that in a way the situation is, once we give up othering, we'll see that the situation is in a way much worse than we fear, but also much better than we hope for at the same time. So I grew up in London into a fairly, not a very wealthy family, but it was a family that had roots in kind of fallen from wealth, I suppose. So fairly not there wasn't money in my family, but they managed to cobble together to send me to a really good school, and then I got into Cambridge University on a scholarship. So I was surrounded by the British elite. I went to this school where the elite sent their children, but then at Cambridge, of course, I was surrounded by the people who were being trained to run the country. So I got to be with those people. Those were the people I was hanging out with, and I saw how they are. I saw how we are. It wasn't even they. It was just us being students, and I could see we were all insecure. We were all, as boys, we were all insecure about girls. We all wanted to prove ourselves. We all wanted to look good. We all felt ashamed and embarrassed sometimes. We all, felt puffed up sometimes. Because, I grew up with people who later were going to be really rich and powerful, but I saw how we were all very much in the same boat. We all got drunk. We all got headaches the next day. After graduation from Cambridge, I did a kind of a flip. I went to India and I lived with Bhagwan Rajneesh, who later was known as Osho. I lived with him in India. I lived with him later in Oregon, if you saw that movie Wild Wild Country. And then I lived with him again in India a second time before actually kind of completing that. Now, Rajneesh was an interesting guy because he really had an agenda to massively fuel othering. So he really created a sort of a bubble of the chosen people who were going to survive. And he had a very strong agenda of encouraging a rebellious, anti-authoritarian stance. So he used to talk about priests and politicians. He even wrote a book called Priests and Politicians, where the priests who created a religion and the politicians who run the state are inherently evil, inherently to be distrusted. And of course, he had a good point. But what it meant was that if you hung out there, it really turned the volume up on this othering of authority. It created a shared distrust of organized society. That distrust is well placed. I mean, you can't trust politicians. They're all vying to try and manipulate and grab votes. And you also can't really trust religion because it's got a whole, a whole ideology to work with as well. But still, by being involved with Rajneesh, it really fueled this sense of othering. So once I left that community, I started to work and write books, and I was a teacher. And eventually, just the way that the cookie crumbled, I wrote these books about transformation, and I ended up working with, or getting engaged to work with the very people that I had learned to other, and that I had even been trained to make into other. So I worked for a while with McKinsey Group, which is probably the largest business consulting group in the world. I worked with people in Boston Consulting Group. At one point, I was coaching one of the richest families in England. I've coached people now who are in some of the highest positions of authority. It was just the way that it worked. It was just like I wrote these books and they got into certain hands and I got introduced to people and I thought, well, yeah, if I can make a difference, then great. So I actually got to rub shoulders with and to meet people who were the very people I assumed were the most evil people on the planet, the ones who are controlling everybody and hurting everybody. And you know what I discovered? By coaching people who were in positions of huge power and wielding billions of dollars in financially that other people don't have, I discovered there's the same feeling of narrow-mindedness, the same feeling of incompetence, the same insecurity, are people going to like me, the same greed, just operating on a much bigger scale, and a kind of lack of empathy for people that they don't have connection with. So, basically, they were othering poor people. They were othering people who don't have their entitlement. It's like, oh, well, I don't know about them. They're kind of, Now, that's not a good thing. That's not something we want to have happen. But I realized people in positions of great power, great authority, are not exactly evil in the way that we fear. It's almost worse than that. It's worse than evil. It's just like narrow-minded, fearful, shoring up that fear and insecurity with the need for power. And I want to tell you one particular story that illustrates this. Because at one point I was at the Harvard Law School annual retreat, right? I was in this, it wasn't even a 5-star hotel, it was in a 7-star hotel. I didn't know that such things existed. And I was teaching there. So in the evening, they had the kind of open, it was in Southern California, had this open place with an open fire, like a fire where you could sit and get your kind of whiskey and, sit around this fire. So all these very wealthy, powerful people at this retreat. So I sit down with these two guys. They were from Switzerland. Very sweet guys, and they're talking about both of their kids were going to a Waldorf school. My kids were going to Waldorf school, so we started talking about Waldorf school. Oh, Waldorf school, very good. That's my attempt at a Swiss German accent, but we were talking about the Waldorf school and the wife, and then we were joking how the children learn knitting when they're very young. And we half an hour we were having a really warm conversation between fathers about children, and they were just like me, just like me. And I said, oh, great, And I said, so what do you do in Switzerland? Oh, we are both lawyers, and we work for Monsanto. What? Oh my God! I've been fraternizing with the enemy. These guys. I mean, for me at that time in my life, Monsanto was just like the worst. That was the ultimate evil, Monsanto. And I had just spent half an hour sipping whiskey, which I don't even usually drink, sipping whiskey with the enemy. But I realized, then we talked a little bit about Monsanto. And I said, wow, Monsanto. I didn't want to kind of go, you're the enemy. But I said, like, Monsanto, really? How do you feel okay about that? And they said, oh, no, it's really good. Monsanto, it helps farmers, And they had a whole ideology worked out where they were doing good things. They were supporting farmers to build in the pesticides to genetically modify the seeds, and they had this whole thing that it was okay. So I realized actually this organization I had seen as completely evil. The problem was not evil. The problem was narrow-mindedness. The problem was not fully being aware that there might be consequences to your actions past what you understand. And this leads me to the point of this video, that in fact the situation on our planet might be far, far worse than even the most wild conspiracy theories would suggest. Much worse than that. Imagine that you're in your house and you've got termites in the basement. So the house has, wood in the basement. It's like a house with a wooden, beams, and they've got termites, right? And then you think to yourself, well, termites are really good chaps. Termites are good, loving creatures. I love termites. The problem is there's just a few bad termites spreading bad stuff. There's just like 1 in 100, maybe 1 in 1,000 bad termites just influencing all the others. If we can just stamp out a few of these termites that are ruining the party of everybody, we'll all get along. If it was like that, the problem would be fairly contained. All you've got to do is replace the leadership within the termite group, and you've got friendly termites who now you can get along with in your house. But unfortunately, it's not like that. The tendency to eat wood, no matter what, whether it's holding up your house or not, is intrinsic to a termite's DNA, right? So it doesn't matter which termites you exterminate, thinking they're the leaders. You're going to have that problem no matter what, because of the very nature of termiteness. And we tend to think the same thing when we other. We think, oh, if we could just take this bad person and get their money away and get them out of influence, and that bad person, everything would be okay. And that tends to be what we do when we other, when we villainize something we don't understand and say, if we could just get you out of power, replace Trump with somebody else. Now, don't for a minute mistake me, I'm not in any way supportive of Trump. But do you really think that if we flip Trump with somebody else, that suddenly all our ills will be over? We do need to flip Trump with somebody else, but still, we will still have other things to deal with as well. So this is the thing about othering. When we say, Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, and then we imagine these terrible things they're doing, the difficulty is we're villainizing a few people, but overlooking that just like termites have hardwired into their DNA the need to chew wood, whether you like it or not, so human beings have certain things hardwired into their DNA as well. And this is kind of the news that's far worse than any conspiracy theory. Because the tendency to dominate others, the tendency to give power away and be dominated by others, the tendency to be violent towards people you don't understand. The tendency to feel insecure and bolster it up with self-aggrandizement, the tendency to be greedy. If you read Noah Harari's book, Sapiens, you'll discover that the little evidence we have prehistoric suggests that we've been basically a pretty undesirable species in our animal nature for a long time, for maybe as long as we have record. You know, there's records that go back 100,000 years that Harari unearthed of where Homo sapiens went in and wiped out an entire valley of buffalo, essentially as far as we can see, for sport. The bodies were left to rot. So this is not like other species killing to eat. It's killing because there's an instinct to be destructive. So in a way, that's like much worse news than the idea. If you think we're all good people, you and me, we're all good people just doing our things. There's just these bad people, the global elite, or the, you know, what do they call that? The New World Order. And they're the bad people. If we could just get rid of them, or expose them, then we'll be able to live in peace and harmony. The problem's much worse than that, because we are not hardwired towards peace and harmony. So if you can, this happened, you know, in Russia. They got rid of the Tsar. If we just get rid of the Tsar, turn everything communist, we'll be great. But look what we got instead in Russia. We got like first Lenin and then Stalin. The suffering didn't go away. We just got different people inflicting it. So that's like the worst news. You know, the worst news is that we are destroying ourselves not because of a few bad apples. We're destroying ourselves because of qualities intrinsic to the nature of the Homo sapiens species. But there is also tremendously good news in that as well, in my opinion. Because if we can recognize that, if we can, when our energy goes into othering and blaming and pointing fingers, it's just Bill Gates, just get rid of Bill Gates and everything's going to be great and we'll all go back to having a happy time together. Well, maybe. But maybe the problem is actually in us. And once we realize that, an interesting thing happens, because once the fingers, you know, they always say this thing, if one finger's pointing at Bill Gates, 3 fingers are pointing at the Bill Gatesness that you're projecting onto him in yourself. So if we can actually see that, as more and more people are open to doing, if we can actually relax the blame and the othering and the projecting, and see that the automatic thoughts and emotions generated by this animal are not very pretty. This animal is competitive, self-aggrandizing, it's arrogant, it easily flares up into confrontation. It's not the most beautiful animal we can imagine, this animal that consciousness is trapped inside. But in the recognition of that, in the capacity to self-reflect, something awakens that is no longer the animal nature. Something awakens that is now recognizing, oh, there's arrogance, there's fight for fight's sake, there's cruelty. You can observe it, and in the observing of it, something is awoken that is not that animal nature. Something that is awoken that you could say is, you could give it a word like awareness, consciousness. And that has more to do with the universal intelligence that made a butterfly's wings so beautiful and made and created all of this amazing beauty. That which is aware of the animal nature is now not the animal nature, it's something vast, which is actually peaceful and loving, which is not fearful because it's not afraid of death, because it doesn't have form. And that, you could say, the code name for that is awakening. To wake up from identifying as an animal. To wake up and to not just look at the activities of certain politicians as undesirable, but to look at the activities of your own mind, the untethered activities of your own mind as undesirable. To recognize the reactive nature of your emotional body as undesirable, just as dangerous as whatever's going on in the White House or anywhere else. When that happens for an individual, and it's not necessarily a black and white thing like a sudden lightning flash moment of enlightenment, but in any moment when that happens, that you can get a little distance on your own animal nature, on your own, it's not just now that the undesirable and dangerous is observed, but that which is observing now has some space. That which is observing has some space to unfurl its wings and to begin to sing its song, which is a song of love, which is a song of forgiveness, of self-forgiveness and forgiveness of others. In my opinion, who am I? Just some guy. In my opinion, that's the only chink of hope for our survival as a species. The Earth, by the way, is not in jeopardy. The Earth's been around for 4.5 billion years, and it's been through all sorts of things. Human civilization on this Earth is no more than a little, skin condition that it will quickly recover from when we're gone. When I say quickly, it may take 1,000 years, maybe 2. The longest it takes for any plastic to break down is about 100 years, I believe. And there's things we've created harder than that, but once we're gone, the Earth will regenerate itself and will create other intelligent life forms. The problem is not for the Earth. The problem is for our particular species. If we keep othering, if we keep creating wars in our mind, wars with people we don't understand, if we keep pointing the finger at villains and projecting villainous behavior onto people just because we don't personally know them, if we keep doing that, we're going to keep exasperating a habit of othering, a habit of anger and hatred, a habit of powerlessness. I'm not sure if I said that word wrong. A habit of powerlessness. And we're probably going to usher our own extinction and maybe take some other species down with us. But if there's the possibility for us, all of us, to recognize these intrinsic qualities of othering and conflict with it built into our DNA, it opens up more and more of a space of another dimension of who we are, which is not animal, which is free and loving. As far as I can see, that is the only chink through which sustainable future exists. There's no guarantee that enough of us are going to do that. There's no guarantee even that a small number may do that to ensure evolution to a higher level of consciousness. But as long as we participate, in my opinion, in othering, as long as we participate in blaming and villainizing other people and thinking that if we could just overthrow their power, we'd be good. As long as we keep doing that, we are really part of the army that is making sure that there is no sustainable future left for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. In any moment that you can just take a breath, relax back into feeling your own condition, noticing how much you've whipped yourself up into a frenzy of blame and distrust. As soon as you can take a breath and feel the benevolence of this moment, the cat playing, the tree outside, the bees buzzing around their beehive, as soon as you can breathe a sigh of gratitude for what's here, you become sane, you become trustworthy. And resting, the more that we can rest in that and seek to form connections with people we don't know instead of othering people we don't know, then we become tiny instruments of a sustainable future instead of ensuring our own mutual destruction. That's just me blabbing away. I'd love to hear your thoughts. There's a comments section below, and whatever's going to happen, friends, I definitely wish you an outstanding day today, and a day when I hope you really do relish and appreciate the small blessings that life is still bestowing upon you, even amidst the stories of chaos that you can find on your news feed. See you later.